Running a business is unpredictable, but with the right insurance, you can face the unexpected with confidence. At Northwest Insurance Agency, we protect what matters most: your people, your property, and your future. Whether it's liability, property, or workers' comp, we tailor coverage to fit your business needs. Because when you're covered, you can focus on what really matters: growing your business. Call us today for a free quote at 1-855-887-5656 or visit us at nwagencies.com. Northwest Insurance Agency, protection that works as hard as you do.
This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody.
1, 2, 3, let me go.
Welcome in, everybody, to the On the Pony Express podcast. I'm Dean Ralsky, coming to you from a rainy Dallas, Texas today. On this edition of the podcast, I'll be giving you my final SMU spring ball thoughts. I know we've talked about it for the last couple of weeks here, so this will be sort of that final spring ball podcast before we turn our attention to recruiting season for SMU. So before we sort of break down each position, and I'll give a question and a prediction for each position group on this podcast, as well as just breaking down almost the depth chart of each position group. Let's hear a word from our friends at the Thomas Auto Group.
The On the Pony Express podcast is also presented by our friends at the Thomas Auto Group. Make sure you head up 75 to McKinney, check out their Ford, Subaru, Volkswagen dealerships, learn about the Thomas Promise, and also when you mention On the Pony Express, you get employee pricing on new and pre-owned vehicles. So check out the Thomas Promise today, and we appreciate Brandon Thomas, an SMU alum, supporting us at the On the Pony Express podcast.
At Thomas Auto Group, the Thomas Promise includes the low price promise,
the pre-owned promise,
and the 72-hour exchange promise.
And finally, the 100% customer satisfaction promise. So shop Thomas Auto Group today, home of the Thomas Promise.
So thank you again to the Thomas Auto Group for sponsoring the On the Pony Express podcast. Now, we'll start out with quarterback. This is a pretty straightforward position to analyze. You've got Kevin Jennings returning. He has looked great all spring. You brought in the true freshman Ty Hawkins, who has really shown some positive signs. You did have Keldrick Luster enter the transfer portal. He ended up signing with Texas State. And so the question for this room is not who's going to start week one. That will be Kevin Jennings, barring anything crazy. The question for this group is, does Coach Lashley and the SMU staff feel they need to add a depth piece to this room? Like I said, you've got Kevin Jennings, you've got Ty Hawkins. You also brought in Tyler Van Dyke out of the transfer portal from Wisconsin. Now, he is still recovering from an ACL injury that he suffered against Alabama early on in the 2024 season. But Coach Lashley did give an update after the spring game. It sounds like he could become available towards the middle of the season. You know, Van Dyke still has a ways to go in his recovery, but it sounded from talking with Coach Lashley that there's a chance that he could play if SMU needs in the 2025 season. So with those three quarterbacks, if Van Dyke can recover, fully and on time, it did not sound like head SMU coach Rhett Lashley would want to bring in another player into this room. He likes the three scholarship guys he has. Of course, he has Charlie Pfizer, the walk-on quarterback, as well. But if Tyler Van Dyke can recover fully, it sounds like this room is done adding players. Now, if for some reason it seems like Tyler Van Dyke won't be able to recover as quickly as they thought, maybe SMU dips into the portal to add a last-second depth piece. But for right now, my prediction is that SMU has all of its quarterbacks on its roster, that it will heading into the 2025 season. So again, quarterback, pretty easy to analyze there. We'll move who's going to be standing next to the quarterback, which is running back. And this is a room that I think SMU fans should be excited about. We've talked about Derek McFall and Chris Johnson all spring long. SMU lost LJ Johnson, Jalen Knighton, and of course, Brashard Smith to the NFL draft, and then also Kamar Wheaton. So they lost a ton of production and really just bodies at the running back room. And so they retained Derek McFall, who again, showed those flashes in his freshman season and really did take that next step this spring. There's no debate. I mean, he really looked the part of a starting running back. Chris Johnson came in from Miami. He looked super strong. But the exciting part for this room is that they've paired up this duo of speedy home run type running backs with a couple of bruiser power backs. Now, one from the transfer portal, that's UCLA running back TJ Harden, who ran for right around 500 yards, was the Bruins' leading rusher in 2024. And then also the Mustangs are bringing in a running back through the high school ranks in Jermico Green out of Conroe, Texas. The staff is super high on him. There are questions about how he will be used in 2025. It's easy to make those predictions before he gets onto campus. We'll have to lay our eyes on him and see what he's able to produce on the football field before we make any productions. But I will say, I think he's going to come in and have an immediate impact, because if you're truly just relying on three running backs, that would be Derek McFall, Chris Johnson, and TJ Harden. That's going to be risky, you could say, heading into a Power 4 schedule. You'd like to have at least four running backs you can rely on and put out there in the backfield to make plays. Now, again, we'll still have to wait and see what Jermico Green looks like when he gets onto campus and how he adjusts to the college level and taking that next step in his career. But from what we've heard and from what we've seen in high school, there's reason to believe he could get on the field right away for SMU. So the question for this room isn't really who is SMU going to add in the transfer portal or anything like that. It's just, how do they want to split up the snaps here? Because again, the balance in this room seems almost perfect between power and speed. And so how do you sort of want to mix and match that? Again, this is where Coach Lashley can have some fun and show off his offensive creativity and how he got to this position. So it's an exciting position for SMU. Of course, no one is going to step in and immediately replace what Brashard Smith did by themselves. But as a whole, this running back room has the potential to be really, really strong and a potential X factor for this SMU offense. So before we move on to the wide receivers, tight ends, and offensive line, let's hear a word from another one of our sponsors at Status Jet.
The On the Pony Express podcast is presented by our friends at Status Jet, statusjet.com. Appreciate their support of us, but also giving you guys a discount on a round trip flight. When you reach out to them and you mention code PonyUpACC or On the Pony Express, they'll give you that discount, whether it be a family vacation of a lifetime, teaming up with a bunch of families to go somewhere, or taking clients and work colleagues on a work trip. Status Jet is the way to go. They can get you from point A to point B with that level of luxury you'd expect and into those tough to get to places as well. So call them today. Just start the conversation because it takes zero membership fee as well. So that's another plus with our friends at Status Jet.
So thank you to longtime sponsor Status Jet for sponsoring the On the Pony Express podcast. Now, as we move into this wide receiver and tight end positions, I'm kind of going to group them together here because I think there will be a lot of overlap in terms of who's catching the passes in 2025. On the outside, look, we knew who was going to step up at this position group before spring ball started. It was always going to be Jordan Hudson and Romello Brinson, the two top returning receivers from last year, and they've both looked the part of all ACC guys in spring ball. Jordan Hudson and Kevin Jennings, I've mentioned it really on the last few podcasts. They have grown their relationship, and it's exciting time because I think Jordan Hudson can step up and be a big time player. And same with Romello Brinson lined up on the other side from him. The question here has really been a question mark ever since SMU lost Jake Bailey and Roderick Daniels, and that is who is going to step up in the slot. Now, SMU had a few guys in the spring that they wanted to test out and see how they would do. That would be Jamarian Carroll, Randy Reese, and Jackson Lavender. Now, Jamarian Carroll and Randy Reese have both stepped away from the program and entered the transfer portal, and that leaves SMU with just Jackson Lavender. The Mustangs did go after BYU wide receiver transfer Keelan Marion, who was an All-American returner and had some nice production in the slot as a Cougar last year. He ultimately decided to go to Miami, so he will still play in Ford Stadium at some point in 2025, but he will not be wearing an SMU uniform. The Mustangs now turn their attention to James Madison transfer Yamir Knight. Knight announced his top 3 on Twitter today. That would be SMU, Cal, and Texas Tech. He finished the 2024 season with 53 catches, 605 yards, and 4 touchdowns for the Dukes. He was also a punt returner, returned 21 punts for around 300 yards. So pretty nice production there, because that is maybe another question mark on this team. SMU tried a bunch of different guys out returning punts in the spring. No one ran away with it, so maybe a potential option could be Yamir Knight if he chooses the Mustangs over the Bears and the Red Raiders. We'll have to wait and see. Of course, make sure you're subscribed to ontheponyexpress.com to find out exactly when Yamir Knight will commit and be the first to find out when the Mustangs land anybody from the transfer portal and the high school recruiting ranks. The Mustangs, of course, on a heater right now in the 2026 class, picking up 3 commitments over the weekend, and they've got a big official visit weekend coming up in just a few days, and we'll have a preview for that in a podcast later this week. But back to wide receiver, Yamir Knight, this would be your slot replacement for a Roderick Daniels Jr. or a Jake Bailey. You would think a plug-and-play guy with the sort of production he had at James Madison last year. And he's a guy with multiple years of eligibility after just finishing his sophomore year at James Madison. So that's sort of the wide receiver room. The question mark there is really, can SMU get Yamir Knight? Because we've talked about the freshmen that are, getting quality reps on the outside, and Dalen Singleton and Jalen Cooper. And it seems like for now, both of those guys are going to stay on the outside. And so you've got really both ends of the spectrum of senior veterans and Romello Brinson and Jordan Hudson. And then you've got Dalen Singleton and Jalen Cooper, who just arrived at SMU, but are already making their mark on the program. And so between that, I think you've got potential there on the outside. I've said that word a lot already in this podcast, but now that we won't see SMU play for a few months, it's really the best word to use. But the outside wide receivers are looking good. The slot, can they land Yamir Knight? But if they can't, it is not the end of the world, because the Mustangs have such a talented tight end room. That would, of course, be RJ Maryland, Matthew Hibner, and Adam Moore. We talked a little bit about this room on a podcast earlier this week, but you have to feel good about this position group as one of the best groups in the country because of the production RJ Maryland had. And he is, on schedule to recover from his ACL injury. Matthew Hibner is not expected to miss much more time after he got banged up early on in spring ball. And Adam Moore, after a relatively successful true freshman season at SMU in the AAC, got banged up with some injuries, ended up redshirting in 2024. He's ready to get back out on the field and continue his development as a Mustang. And so can Matthew Hibner line up in the slot? I think absolutely. You saw a little bit of that actually against Penn State, and that had success early on in the game. And so there's again potential there for Coach Lashley to have some fun and keep defensive coordinators up at night with the different schemes, formations, packages that he wants to come up with. So that's a position group. Again, I talked about the running back room being a bit of an unknown and potentially therefore an X factor. The tight end room is not an unknown, but how Coach Lashley will utilize all of these tight ends is maybe not, for certain on paper. So we'll have to wait and see. But the tight end room, very exciting group for the Mustangs. The offensive line, we've talked a lot about it on these last few podcasts. So I really want to break down left tackle, because I think left guard is Logan Parr's, and he's got it, and that's been his spot. Addison Nichols, transfer from Arkansas, has come in and, taken that spot for sure. And then PJ Williams had a great year at right tackle in 2024. He's continued to improve and, again, has that right tackle spot down pretty well, and that's his spot come week 1. At right guard, some question marks there. I think you could look at a Nate Anderson, a Joshua Bates, especially. Those two have gotten a lot of reps there. Joshua Bates has gotten some reps at center as well, so maybe Nate Anderson is emerging at right guard. We'll have our full depth charts for each position group on the Pony Express. We've started dropping them this week. We'll get to offensive line later down the line. But for now, let's talk about left tackle because, people weren't super happy with Savion Byrd's end of the year, but you have to remember he was going up against some of the best talent that college football had to offer. When you think of the Clemson game, TJ Parker, he's back for another year, so Byrd will likely have his rematch there in Death Valley in the middle of the season when the Mustangs take on Clemson. And look, TJ Parker did not go pro, but he's going to be likely a highly sought-after edge prospect in the 2026 NFL draft. And then, of course, in the playoff game against Penn State, you had the number 3 overall pick, Abdul Carter, going up against Savion Byrd. And yes, he was the number 3 overall pick, but a lot of people had him as the number 1 overall prospect in the 2025 NFL draft class. So can you blame the man for not having the most perfect game out there in Happy Valley? And Abdul Carter is just an absolute freak. And so Savion Byrd, but you have to remember, Byrd played against Boston College. Donovan Ezeraku, who went in the second round to the Dallas Cowboys, did not get a sack on Kevin Jennings. Boston College as a team did not sack Kevin Jennings. And so Byrd proved he is able to play at a high level. And right now he is probably that starting left tackle, but there will be competition when you think of Dramad Odoms coming in this summer. How quickly can he push Savion Byrd? We know how highly rated he was on all the recruiting websites as a high school prospect. And then he played a really, really well at the All-American Bowl. And so when he comes to campus this summer, how quickly can he push Savion Byrd? A lot of people say iron sharpens iron. And so that'll be likely a matchup of, who can step up and beat out one another, but also make each other better. I think that's something where when you've looked at these SMU teams these last couple of years, and specifically position battles, it really has been iron sharpens iron. And when you talk with the players about battling out for snaps against other players, it's all positive. They want what's best for the team. There's not a lot of people being selfish on this team. And, we've talked about the culture that SMU has built here over the last couple of years. And that's a perfect example of what Coach Lashley is trying to build, but really has already built in his time as the Mustangs head coach. So that left tackle spot, again, will be one to watch as we are still a ways away from fall camp, but especially as Dramad Odoms gets to campus. Now, as we move over to defense, before we start talking about the defensive line, let's hear from our friends at Mignon.
The On the Pony Express podcast is presented by Mignon. Mignon, right there in Plano, just south of the HEB. They've been there for decades, producing unbelievable food. And they also have a great brunch on Sundays only. It starts at 10:30. But whether you do dinner with them 7 days a week or that brunch, make sure you book through the Open Table app. Reservations go quick at this place because it is just the perfect vibe with that patio right there on the waterfront or just their dining room, cozy, romantic. You can get a great work dinner in too if you need it. The bar's perfect. They've got the champagne on ice. All of those things that you'd expect from a fine dining experience, Mignon has it. So make sure you head over there. It's worth the drive from wherever you are in DFW to visit Mignon. They've been there for decades in Plano, and they are SMU owned, as Nick DeTore and his family have run it now for many, many years, creating great food and great ambiance at Mignon in Plano.
All right, so as we move over to defensive line, of course, SMU lost a ton of production, a ton of leaders across the defensive line from last year. So the question for this group is how quickly can really this group gel, but especially the new additions. The Mustangs have picked up quite a few transfer additions here over the last few weeks, and really just dating back to the winter transfer portal. Now, they brought in Terry Webb and Jeffrey Embaugh. Those were the two headliners on the defensive line in terms of transfers, and they've both looked the part. And for now, have those starting positions on the interior of the defensive line locked up. You've got Cam Robertson. You've got Isaiah Smith coming back. So that first group looks really, really strong. But what made SMU's defensive line last year excel was the depth they had all across the defensive line. So again, at Bandit, you've got Billy Walton, who's looked really, really good. You've got DJ Warner as well, who has come in from Kansas and looks sharp. You know, he's still got a few years of eligibility, but man, he is going to be some player one day for the Mustangs. And so you feel good there. On the other side, you've got Ja'Kai Lang, who came in from Missouri, 14 tackles, 3 sacks, and 3 years of eligibility. He's 6'3", 250 pounds. He could compete to back up Cam Robertson. You also brought in Akil Washington, a transfer from South Alabama. He's someone that had 40 tackles and 10 starts in 2024 at South Alabama, spent a few years at Liberty before Alabama. And in his time with the Flames, he had 84 tackles and 7 sacks. So plenty of college production there for Akil Washington. He's 6'2", 235. So not absolutely the biggest guy on this defensive line, but somebody with proven production that can also come in and push really either Cam Robertson or Isaiah Smith, because he can play on either side of the defensive line. Now, if you had to pick a specific position to have a question, it's really the defensive tackle spot and the depth. Again, Mba and Webb look great, but behind them, the Mustangs have brought in a couple more transfers, including William Wu Spencer from Louisville, who was recruited as an offensive lineman out of high school and now plays defensive line, or did play defensive line for the Louisville Cardinals. Comes to SMU, made 4 tackles last year. He is a big body, 6'5", just over 300 pounds, and he's got 3 years of eligibility. And then the second name, the most recent name to add to this defensive line room, is Kevionta Spears from Memphis. He had 3 tackles in 2024, but had 17 tackles and 2 sacks in 2023 at Louisiana Tech. He is 6'4", 300 pounds. Again, SMU was super successful on the defensive line last year because of that nose tackle position. When you think of Tank Booker and the double teams he was able to attract, is SMU trying to replicate similar to Tank Booker? Now, no one's going to be able to replace Tank Booker, who did sign with the Oakland Raiders, so congratulations to him on taking the next step in his career. But can either of these guys, more likely Kevionta Spears, as he does have more experience at the college level, but which one of these guys can come in and provide valuable depth for SMU? Again, that's the name of the game for this defensive line, is who can come in and play an extra 10, 15 snaps and let that first line, if you will, rest and recover and stay fresh throughout each game, but also down the line over the course of the season as well. So defensive line, the Mustangs, have really worked hard in the transfer portals, picking out pieces, and it seems like on paper it's paid off. We'll have to wait and see. Moving on to linebacker, it's a similar question. SMU loses their top 2 linebackers from last year in Ahmad Walker and Kobe Wilson. So who will step up for SMU? Right now, it looks like Zakai Barker and Alex Kilgore will be the ones to step up. Mustangs still active in the transfer portal here. They are looking to bring in Amari Campbell, a transfer from North Carolina. He is someone that has tons of production at North Carolina in 2024 and is actually rated the number 2 overall player still available in the transfer portal, according to On3. Had 77 tackles, 6.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and a couple of pass breakups at North Carolina. So someone, again, with a lot of ACC experience and production. He's also looking at Penn State. So that is also another team to look out for in terms of who is trying to get after this highly recruited transfer portal linebacker, Amari Campbell. So before we move on to the secondary, let's hear a word from our final sponsor of the day at Manny's Tex-Mex.
The On the Pony Express podcast is presented by our friends at Manny's Tex-Mex, 4 locations across DFW. And guess what? When you say queso, queso, they say thank you, thank you. for getting your 10% off discount. And they love it when you're sitting there having a meal with them at Manny's. It's a really great family atmosphere. You can have a great margarita, fresh ingredients on your food, great lunch specials. You can have it all at Manny's. And when you say queso, you get 10% off your order. So it's dine in or carry out only, excludes alcohol because of laws and also the third-party delivery apps. But when you dine in or do carry out, make sure you say queso. And we're looking forward to a huge event on Cinco de Mayo too. So stay tuned for more on that at Manny's Tex-Mex. So whether it be Saxe, Heath, right there, Coit and Campbell, just south of Plano and Richardson, or on Mockingbird at their Lakewood location, it's always a great time at Manny's. Make sure you check them out, Manny's Tex-Mex.
So thank you again to Manny's Tex-Mex for sponsoring the On the Pony Express podcast. And as Billy said, we will be having an event on Cinco de Mayo at Manny's Tex-Mex from 6 to 8 p.m. at their Mockingbird location. We'll have some special guests and some specials from Manny's Tex-Mex on Cinco de Mayo. And of course, saying queso gets you 10% off. So super excited for that event. It'll be just a few days after Billy Embody returns from his trip from France. So he'll have lots of thoughts over what's happened over the last couple of weeks, because a lot has happened on the basketball side, football recruiting, and then of course, spring ball has wrapped up. So our final sort of position group here is cornerbacks and safeties. I'll group them as the secondary, because this is a group that, again, I touched a little bit on our last podcast, where safety, you have to feel really good. The Mustangs had opportunities to go after players in the transfer portal and maybe add one more player. They really ultimately chose not to. They like what they have there. Of course, the two stars are Ahmad Moses and Isaiah Wacobia, two all ACC guys. That's what they'll be hoping for in 2025. And then at corner, we didn't see any of Syracuse transfer Marcellus Barnes during spring. He was wearing a no-contact jersey, but there are high hopes for what he can achieve at SMU, especially in 2025. Beyond him, you saw Deuce Harmon just continue to take steps in the right direction. Again, it took a little bit of time for him to adjust from life at Texas A&M to SMU when he transferred in last summer. A full offseason under his belt will do him a world of good, and he's got the chance to start alongside most likely Marcellus Barnes, although that's certainly not set in stone at this point. Jalen Davis Robinson, again, it's his third year at SMU. You love to see him take that next jump and level up, and you're just still waiting to see it. So it's certainly still possible for him to, have a great fall camp and start week one when SMU takes on East Texas A&M. But for now, if I had to pick my two starters, it would be Marcellus Barnes and it would be Deuce Harmon on the other side. And then at nickel, again, Lamadrick Spencer and Kyron Chambers. That's a position group that Mustang fans should feel pretty good about, because those two players are pushing each other in the right way. And so that's, again, a group Mustang fans should feel comfortable with. Now, the question for this group is, who will emerge at corner? Because you've got a group there who, again, I've said this word a lot in this podcast, has the potential. Marcellus Barnes played a lot as a freshman at Syracuse. Deuce Harmon got plenty of experience out there at corner. Same with Jalen Davis Robinson. The Mustangs, of course, lose Cale Sanders at nickel, and they lose Brandon Crossley on the outside. So who will step up for them? They have bodies there. Can Will Nettles take a step as well? He had a nice spring. I should definitely mention him. He's a guy that could certainly be in the rotation come this fall. So it's just sort of a wait and see position here. The defensive line, it will take a few weeks for them to truly hit their stride. So this group is going to have to be ready and pretty early on, because when you think of who SMU plays in non-conference, you've got Baylor in week 2, you've got TCU in week 4, and then you play Syracuse right after that. So they will have their hands full. It will be good tests for them early on, but this defensive room is going to have to work as a whole, I should say, because the defensive line might have been able to cover up some of the missed assignments and stuff like that for the secondary last year, but at least early on this season, you can't count on that. And so this secondary will have to step up, especially with some of the senior leaders like Ahmad Moses and Isaiah Wacobia. So I know this one was a little bit on the shorter side of a podcast, but again, we've talked a lot about spring football these last couple of weeks. So just wanted to give my final thoughts and questions heading into summer. And, on the next edition of the On the Pony Express podcast, we will have a preview for the Mustangs' big recruiting weekend, official visit weekend they've got this weekend. And so we'll preview that with all the prospects and where SMU stands with all of the highly touted guys coming to the Hilltop this weekend. So that said, I want to thank you all for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. If you're not, make sure you're subscribed to the ontheponyexpress.com website to make sure you stay up to date with all things SMU athletics.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU3 and on Instagram at On3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.